Good afternoon, everyone. My presentation topic is The Anatomy of Political Conscience, George Orwell, from Imperialism to the Cold War. Here are my academic and presentation details, table of contents, research question and hypothesis. My research question is, how did George Orwell's transition from an imperial policeman to an anti-totalitarian icon reflect a shifting tension between his desire for aesthetic enthusiasm and his political purpose? My hypothesis is Orwell's political identity was forged through a rejection of institutionalized authority, first in the racialized law of Burma and later in the ideological dogma of Spain. However, his ultimate status as a state privileged writer during the Cold War created a complex paradox where the critique of Big Brother is repurposed as an instrument of state propaganda. My introduction is post 1936, writing for Orwell became an explicitly defensive and political gesture. The desire for aesthetic enthusiasm is superseded by a historical impulse to see things as they are. In his famous essay, Why I Write, Orwell states, "No book is genuinely free from political bias. The opinion that art should have nothing to do with politics is itself a political attitude." Every line of his serious work, he states in his essay, he ever written was after 1936 perhaps directly or indirectly against totalitarianism and for democratic socialism. The Imperial Foundation, law, race and performance of authority. The Burmese were treated as an inferior race. Though the law was supposed to be the same for all, it was interpreted to favor the British. It was the main experience for George Orwell to have served in Burma as an imperial police officer. The enforcer of empire is portrayed as a victim of the system. This enforcer of empire is can be interpreted as George Orwell, forced into a theoretical display of power to avoid ridicule. Orwell, in his essay, another essay, Shooting an Elephant, says that I perceived in this moment that when the white man turns tyrant, it is his own freedom that he destroys. He wears a mask and his face grows to fit it. This prison of prestige identifies the psychological cost of maintaining a racialized legal hierarchy. The modernist pivot, disillusionment and documentary realism. Orwell also borrows some significant formal strategies from the war books and from the tradition of literary modernism, especially the device of a limited, prejudiced, and confused narrator. For those who fought in Spain in Spanish Civil War, defeating Franco was crucial to prevent a wide conflagration, shifting the focus of modernism away from mourning and towards active prevention. In 1984, Orwell writes, "History has stopped. Nothing exists except an endless present in which the party is always right." Totalitarian logic, language, power, and the erasure of history. What Orwell learned in Burma about law and order as an imperial police officer had important repercussions for the development of his political views and for his future writing about power and violence. The two main sources of the two main books are 1984 and Animal Farm. Power is no longer a mean to an end. It is the end itself, achieved through the systematic destruction of language. Orwell writes in 1984, history has stopped. Nothing exists but an endless present in which the party is controlled. Party is always right. This is the language which George Orwell uses. The geopolitical structure of 1984 reflects lingering imperial anxieties where the racialized other is permanently subjugated. The Cold War paradox. The Cold War here is the Spanish Cold War, which was from 1936 to 1939. Orwell's radical left-wing reputation would ensure wider currency, stronger credibility, and greater efficacy in the officials' ideological battle against the Soviet Union. The collaboration with the Information Research Department illustrates a state privileged status mirroring the hierarchies he critiqued. Officials were capable of using Orwell skillfully and clumsily, for the most part promoting his works, on other occasions distorting them. While some, like Frances Stoner, have criticized Orwell for having confused the role of the intellectual with that of the policeman, the majority have put their weight behind Crick and Astor. The evaluation of concise comparative synthesis. The George Orwell served in the Imperial police officer in Burma. This was he was a part of government at that time, and he experienced such a racialized attitude towards the Burmese people that these kind of situations made him write things like 1984. And then comes the radical George Orwell, fight with the POUM militia Spanish Civil War, which rejects of propaganda and the pivot to political realism. The visionary authorship of 1984. The 1984 is not the end of his career, and it is just the uh, first part of his peak career. Language is a tool for total ontological control. He uses language to enlighten the people against propaganda and totalitarianism. But at the end, what happens after his life is the most crucial part. In most of the part, uh, uh, George Orwell writes in such a way that you cannot grasp the meaning by taking the surface level meanings. But in this might have contributed a lot to the various interpretations of his works, such as 1984 and Animal Farm. And in the Cold War, many states privileged they state used George Orwell as state managed asset, and they used Orwell just against himself. The way Orwell might have not have able to accept it. The legacy of a managed conscience. As Shaw writes in his article, I hope this study adds to our understanding of how politics and literary culture interpreted during the Cold War, and how popular Cold War images could be formed with clandestine assistance from government. These are my references. Thank you. If anyone has any questions.
How did Orwell's real life experience as a police officer in Burma influence the fictional world he created in 1984?
As an officer, George Orwell served in Burma, and where Burmese people were cruelly subjugated by the colonizers, Britishers. And in this manner, the Britishers could stand for the party, and the people like Winston Smith can stand for the Burmese people. Another question.
My question is, do you think Orwell would have agreed with how Western government used his writing as propaganda during the Cold War?
This is the most crucial part in George Orwell's writing. When he died, no one was able to grasp the meaning of his works entirely, but uh, the general people do not know what George Orwell wants to say. In the texts like Animal Farm in 1984, you can just read them as normal literature, and you can read them as a critique of government as well. But what played a most significant role in shaping the influences and interpretations of these texts is that when George Orwell died, the Cold War in Spanish, and the government used George Orwell against himself, against the idea that George Orwell might not have accepted. And his texts were supposed to oppose these ideas that were proposed by the Spanish Civil War government. Thank you, everyone.